Your daughter is the reason I cannot carry a pregnancy.
What are you saying?
I am saying what the prophet confirmed tonight. The moment your late wife died, her spirit entered her and she has been carrying a spirit of death and barrenness.
From the day they met her, they called her a witch. To them, she was not a woman of mystery, not a child of power, not even someone deserving of respect. They looked at a 17-year-old girl, a child who had barely grown into a woman, and they pointed their fingers and called her witch. And the man who should have shielded her from that word, he believed it. He actually believed it. But here is what none of them counted. The fire they tried to extinguish in her was the very fire that would one day light up the whole of Nairobi. This is the story of Mukima, and I promise you, by the time this story is done, you will never look at suffering the same way again. To understand Mukima, you must first understand where she came from. She was born in a small rented apartment in the Buruburu area of Nairobi, a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business, where the walls were thin, and where the smell of cooking at dawn was the only alarm clock most families needed. Her father was a good man. Roger Wambugu was not a wealthy man, but he was not poor at heart. He worked as a clerk at a small codlishing company in Donholm. He ironed his shirts every morning. He paid his tithe on Sundays. He was a man who believed that if you did what was right, life would return the favor. And her mother was Wathira. Oh, Wathira. The neighbors still talked about Wathira long after she was gone. They said she had a laugh that could make a grieving man smile. They said her pilau rice could settle any quarrel. They said she had eyes that were as warm as the setting sun, the kind of eyes that made you feel seen, truly seen, even when the world had turned its back on you. But Wathira never got to hold her daughter long. The very night Mukima came into this world, kicking and screaming, tiny and full of life, Wathira closed her eyes and never opened them again. Complications during childbirth, that was what the nurses said. Cold words for something so devastatingly warm. And Roger, who had just heard his daughter cry for the first time, walked out of that hospital corridor carrying two things at once: the miracle of a new life and the unbearable weight of irreversible loss. He named the baby Mukima. It was the name Wathira had chosen, the very last gift she ever gave. For the first 4 years of Mukima's life, Roger tried. He really tried. He hired a neighbor, Mama Kamau, to help care for the baby while he worked. He came home every evening and held his daughter. He told her stories before bed, stories about brave women and clever animals and villages with powerful queens. He was not a perfect father, but he was a present one. But grief, you see, is a patient hunter, and loneliness is the trap it sets. By the time Mukima was 5 years old, Roger was longing for companionship again. He was only 32. The nights were long, and the apartment felt hollow. And every time he looked at little Mukima, at her mother's jawline, her mother's serious eyes, his heart would break a little more. He needed someone new to help him move forward. He just never considered what that someone new would cost his daughter. Her name was Ndinda Matheka, 30 years old, originally from Machakos town, but Nairobi bred and Nairobi sharpened. She had fine bone structure, a confident walk, and a smile that she deployed like a weapon, wide when it suited her, gone when it didn't. She came into Roger's life through a church introduction, a matchmaking by well-meaning deacons who thought Roger had mourned long enough. And in the very beginning, Ndinda was kind to Mukima. She bought her sweets, she combed her hair, she called her my daughter in front of people. But there is an African saying that goes, when water is boiling slowly, the one watching does not yet know the danger. Mukima was 6 years old. She did not know to watch. It started with small things, extra chores given only to Mukima, food served last to her, a hiss when Mukima spoke too loudly, a pinch on the arm when no one was watching. By the time Mukima was 8, Ndinda stopped pretending. The cruelty became as ordinary as breakfast. But there was something else, something that twisted Ndinda's heart in a way that was darker than simple dislike. Ndinda could not conceive. Month after month, year after year, she had prayed, fasted, seen doctors, visited prophets, burnt incense, planted seeds in the earth, and waited, and nothing came. Her womb remained stubbornly, heartbreakingly silent. And somehow, in the maze of her pain and desperation, she found a target. It was a Tuesday night in October when Ndinda first said the words aloud. She had come home from a women's prayer meeting, and something in her face had changed, as if someone had poured fresh gasoline onto the smoldering thing she had been carrying for years. She sat Roger down, she folded her hands, and she said, "Your child is the reason I cannot carry a pregnancy." Roger blinked. "What are you saying?" "I am saying what the prophet has confirmed tonight," Ndinda said, her voice steady, controlled. "The moment your late wife died, her spirit entered that baby. That child has been carrying a spirit of death and barrenness since the day she was born. She is the reason your first wife died. She is the reason my womb is closed. Mukima is a witch." Now, in the doorway, 12-year-old Mukima pressed her hand over her mouth. She had heard the word before. Children in the neighborhood sometimes used it as an insult in arguments, but to hear it spoken by an adult, by the woman in her home about her, it was as if someone had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart until it cracked. She looked down at her own hands, small hands, thin wrists, the hands of a child who had done nothing but exist. "Am I a witch?" she whispered to herself in the dark of that doorway. "Is it true? Is that why my mother died?" Roger did not shout at Ndinda that night. That was the part that would haunt Mukima for years. He did not shout. He did not stand up and say, "Do not speak about my daughter that way." He did not reach across that center table and remind his wife that Mukima was 12 years old and had never harmed a single soul. He sat there. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Let us pray about it." That was all. Let us pray about it. 4 years went by. 4 years of increasing cruelty. 4 years of Mukima eating last, sleeping on the floor when the apartment was full of guests, scrubbing clothes by hand while Ndinda's biological niece, who had come to stay, watched television. 4 years of being called that child, of being told her presence poisoned the home, of whispers from Ndinda's friends when they visited, women who looked at Mukima with suspicious eyes, as if she might curse them simply by bringing their tea. Mukima endured it all. She focused on school. She was not the best student. Hunger and exhaustion and heartache are not good companions for learning, but she tried. She clung to her school books like they were the only solid things in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. But by Mukima's 16th year, Ndinda had reached the end of her patience. She had not conceived. 3 miscarriages had come and gone. Each loss had carved new chambers of bitterness in her heart, and she had filled each one with the same name, Mukima. She told Roger, "If you want this marriage to continue, that girl cannot stay in this house. Choose me or her." And Roger who loved Mukima, who had loved that name Wathira had chosen, who once told his little girl stories about brave women, Roger chose Ndinda. He stood on the doorstep of his own apartment and told his 16-year-old daughter to go. He could not look her in the eyes when he said it. His hands were shaking, but he said it. "Mukima, you must leave." She walked out of that compound. She walked down the street. She did not cry, not yet. She told herself she would not give them the satisfaction of her tears on their street. She would wait until she was far enough away that they couldn't see her. She walked 3 full streets before she sat down on the edge of a gutter cab and finally let it out. She cried until her body had nothing left, and then she stood up because Nairobi does not stop for grief. Nairobi does not slow down for a 16-year-old girl with a plastic bag and a broken heart. Nairobi keeps moving, and so she moved with it. She learned the streets the way Nairobi forces you to learn them, quickly and with pain as your teacher. The first night, she slept under the awning of a shop in River Road, pressed against a wall with 2 other street boys who were too tired to bother her. The second night, a woman who sold sweetbread by the roadside took pity on her and let her sleep on a mat in the back of her stall. That woman, Mama Atieno, the neighbors called her, did not ask too many questions. She had her own past, and she recognized the look on Mukima's face, the look that said, "I am not here by choice." She gave Mukima a corner to sleep in, and in exchange, Mukima helped sell bread from 5 in the morning. Within 2 weeks, Mukima had saved enough small change from tips and her own hawking to buy a crate of aqua water. She became a water girl. If you have ever driven on the Naivasha Expressway or sat in traffic on the Athi River Bridge, you have seen them. These young people who dance between cars, balancing trays on their heads, calling out their goods with voices trained by necessity to cut through the noise. "Cold water, buy your cold water." Mukima became one of them. She learned which roads had the best traffic, long enough for sales, short enough to be safe. She learned which drivers were generous and which ones would take a bottle and speed away without pain. She learned how to spot the policemen before they spotted her. She learned how to smile when everything inside her was screaming. She survived, but surviving and living are not the same thing. And even as she learned the rhythms of the street, the pain never fully left her. She would sometimes see fathers dropping their daughters at school from a car, and she would look away quickly, because if she looked too long, the grief would climb back up her throat, and she couldn't afford to cry in traffic. She thought about her father often. She didn't hate him, not yet, not completely. She just couldn't understand him. She turned the question over in her mind like a stone she couldn't put down. How does a man look at his child and choose someone else? She never found an answer, so she kept working, kept selling, kept surviving. By 17, she had graduated from water bottles to chain cookies and plantain chips. A slightly higher margin, a slightly better position. She shared a small room in a cramped compound in Dandora with 3 other girls who walked similar trades. It was not a home, but it had a roof. And then when she was 19, everything changed again. She found the factory by accident. She had been chasing a lead on a cleaning job in a block of offices near River Road when she passed a small bakery on Mwindimbingu Road, one of those Nairobi-style bread factories that operated from morning to midnight, pumping out hundreds of loaves a day for the neighborhood market. A handwritten notice was pasted to the gate. Workers needed, accommodation provided. Those last 2 words, accommodation provided. She walked in before she even finished reading the fine. The owner, a sharp-eyed, heavy-set man called Musomba, looked her up and down and said, "You know anything about bread?" "I know how to eat it," she said. He didn't laugh, but something shifted in his expression. "You're honest," he said. "Come back tomorrow morning, we will see." She came back at 5 a.m. She learned. Mukima was not just a hard worker, she was an obsessive learner. In the bakery, she discovered something she had never expected. She loved the process. She loved the science of it, the way flour and water and yeast became something alive in your hands, the way heat transformed raw dough into something solid, golden, and nourishing. She paid attention to everything: how much water changed the texture, how long to knead, how temperature affected the rise. She asked questions that the veteran bakers found strange. Why does the bread sometimes come out too dense? Is it the yeast or the proofing time? Until eventually, even the senior workers started noticing that this quiet girl in the corner was learning at twice the speed of everyone else. She lived in the small workers' quarters behind the factory, a bunk bed in a room she shared with 2 other women. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, and after years on the street, safe was a luxury she did not take for granted. She worked in that factory for 5 years. 5 years of 5 a.m. shifts, 5 years of flour in her hair and burn marks on her forearms from the oven racks, 5 years of learning, saving, watching, planning. And during those 5 years, something extraordinary happened. Mokima discovered that she didn't just love making bread, she loved baking more. In her off hours, Sundays, public holidays, she began experimenting in the small communal kitchen at the back of the workers' quarters. Donuts, butter pie, meat pie. She made them for her co-workers first, just to share, just to try. And the reactions told her everything she needed to know. It was her hands. Something in the way Mokima's hands worked the dough, something in the love she had been denied for so long, now poured into every fold and layer and filling, produced something that simply tasted different. Not different like unusual, different like better. Different like the food her father's mother used to cook. Different like something made for you specifically with care. She didn't know it yet, but she was holding something priceless. She had been holding it all along. She left the factory at 24. It was the hardest thing she had done since leaving her father's house, because the factory had given her shelter and routine. And routine for a woman who had survived on pure uncertainty had become a kind of comfort. Leaving it meant stepping back into the open air of risk. But she had saved methodically, quietly, week by week, a sum that was small by most standards, but enormous in what it represented. Every shilling a sacrifice, every 100-shilling note a choice she had made to eat less, buy less, ask less. She took that money. She rented a tiny space, not a shop, just a corner of a woman's veranda near Kenyatta Market. She bought her ingredients, her oil, her flour, her seasoning, her packaging, small cellophane bags. She labeled by hand with the name she had decided on, Mukimas. Just that, Mukimas. Because for all her life, people had tried to define her with other names: witch, burden, nuisance, mistake. Now she would define herself. The first day she sold out before noon. She thought it was luck. She made more the next day, sold out again. By the end of the first week, people were showing up specifically for her cable, not because of fancy packaging or a big sign, because word had spread. That woman near Kenyatta Market, her meat pie? I'm telling you, it's not normal. My husband doesn't like meat pie. He ate 5 of hers. 5. The butter pie, I bought it for my children, and they didn't even share with me. I had to go back and buy more. But it was not all golden. This is where I must slow down and tell you about the harder part of Mokima's journey, the part that doesn't make it into the newspaper headlines. Because even as her sales grew, there were days when the roadside landlady raised her corner rent without warning. Days when a batch of meat pies didn't seal properly and had to be thrown away. A loss stung like a slap. Days when a supplier sold her substandard flour and she didn't catch it until the dough came out wrong and she had to start again with money she didn't have to spare. There were nights when she sat on her bunk. She still lived in the same compound, the same shed room, and she counted her costs against her earnings and felt the cold hand of doubt pressing on her chest. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm not good enough? What if they were right about me? What if everything I touch turns to nothing? But what Mokima was learning the hard way, the only way any real knowledge is learned, is that sometimes a hard thing and a bad thing are not the same. The hardship she was enduring was not punishment, it was preparation. Every time a batch failed, she learned something. Every time a customer gave her feedback, even harsh feedback, she adjusted. She began packaging more professionally. She bought a second-hand market trolley so she could display more product. She learned how to price without undervaluing herself. She was not just making food, she was building a business education, one piece at a time. And then, on one Wednesday afternoon in the second year of her roadside store, the conversation that would change everything happened. A woman in a business suit stopped at her table. She bought 1 meat pie, ate it standing there on the street, and then stood very still for a moment. Then she turned around. "How many of these can you produce in a day?" she asked. "How many do you need?" Mukima replied. Her name was Mrs. Tetu. She was the procurement manager for a chain of mid-range supermarkets in Nairobi. She was not there by accident. 2 of her junior staff had mentioned Mukima's meat pies in the office 3 times in 1 week. That was enough for Mrs. Tetu to make the trip herself. She sat down across from Mukima, right there at the roadside table, and they talked for 45 minutes about volume, about consistency, about hygiene certification, about supply schedules, about packaging requirements. Mrs. Tetu handed Mukima a card when they were done. "Sort out the certification, get the packaging properly printed, come see me in 3 months. If you can supply reliably, I will put you in 4 of our stores." She stood. She smoothed her suit, and for what it's worth, that meat pie is the best I've had in Nairobi. Do not change the recipe. She walked away. Mukima held the business card in both hands and stared at it for a very long time. The 3 months were brutal. To meet Mrs. Tetu's requirements, Mukima needed a certified production space, proper packaging, and HACCP registration, Kenya's food safety certification. That meant navigating government offices, application forms, inspections, and fees that seemed designed specifically to discourage people like her. She went to every office. She filled every form. When she was told to come back, she came back. When she was told the file was missing, she didn't argue. She quietly produced her own copy and resubmitted. She borrowed a small amount from 2 co-workers she trusted, promising to repay with interest within 6 months. She did in 4. She found a shared commercial kitchen space in industrial area that she could rent by the day, then by the week, then by the month.
She hired her first employee, a young woman named Zulfa, and trained her personally the way the factory veterans had once trained her, patiently, thoroughly, with the understanding that the standard was non-negotiable. And at the end of 3 months, she stood in that aisle for 4 minutes. She did not take a photograph. She did not call anyone. She simply stood there looking at her name on a shelf in a supermarket. And she thought about every single night she had slept under a shop awning, every bottle of water she had balanced on her head, every time someone had looked through her like she wasn't there. And she thought about her mother, Wathira. "I hope you can see this," she whispered. "I hope wherever you are, you can see this." From 4 stores, the word spread. Customers began asking specifically for Mukima. Store managers in other branches called Mrs. Tetu asking how to get the supply. By the end of that year, Mukima was supplying 12 supermarket branches across Nairobi. She rented her own production facility. She hired a team of 6. She brought in a young woman she knew from church to handle bookkeeping because numbers were not Mukima's strength, and she knew it. Her brand expanded. Donuts, butter pie, mandazis, small snacks for events. Corporate orders started coming in. Office parties, weddings, birthdays. And then, the year Mukima turned 28, a popular Nairobi breakfast and lifestyle program featured her on their segment called The Hustle and the Hunger, Nairobi Women Who Built from Nothing. Nairobi watched, Nairobi listened, and then Nairobi told everyone it knew. Mukima became a household name. They had seen her on television, of course they had. Nairobi is a city of 6 million, but screens make the world small. Roger had been eating his dinner when the television presenter said the name Mukima, and he had frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth. He had watched the entire segment without moving. Ndinda, beside him, had said nothing. For 3 days after the broadcast, the house on Muindishin was very quiet. And then, Roger, for perhaps the first time in many years, made a decision without consulting his wife. He found out through an old neighbor who still kept contact with people who knew Mukima's story. He got a phone number. He sat with it for 2 weeks, picking it up and putting it down before he finally called. The phone rang 3 times. "Hello?" Her voice, older now, steadier but the same. "Hello?" he said, and then he couldn't find any other words. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Daddy." Not a greeting, not forgiveness, not yet, just the word. Naming him, acknowledging that he still existed. It was the most painful 2 syllables Roger had ever had.
They met eventually. It took months of careful navigation. A phone call became two. Two became a short meeting at a neutral place, a restaurant in the city center, in the middle of the day, in public, where no one had to pretend to be more okay than they were. Roger came with Ndinda. He had aged significantly. The upright publishing company clerk of Mukima's childhood had become a slower, grayer man with a particular posture of someone who has been carrying regret for a very long time. He had retired early, health complications had come, and the money that had seemed sufficient in those years had proven to be much less so in these ones. Ndinda was different too. The confident, sharp-edged woman who pointed her finger at a 12-year-old girl and called her a witch had become smaller. Not in size, in certainty, in the particular way that life reduces people when the stories they told themselves stop holding up. She had never conceived, not once, the very thing she had blamed on Mukima, the very thing she had weaponized to destroy a child's life, had remained stubbornly, mercilessly absent. And somewhere in the years of silence and reflection, she had been forced to sit with what that meant. The witch she had created had come to nothing. The innocent girl she had thrown away had come to this. Ndinda apologized. Not immediately, not cleanly. The words came out broken and rearranged, the way true apologies often do. Not the rehearsed kind, but the stumbling kind, the kind that reveal how long a person has been holding something in. She said, "I was wrong. I was in pain and I made you carry it. That was wrong." She said, "I have asked God every day. I don't know if you will ever forgive me." She said, "What I called you, you are never that. I think I knew it even then. I just needed somewhere to put my anger and you were there." Mukima listened to all of it. She did not cry, not there. She had done her crying in private long ago in rooms that had no witnesses. She was done with that particular season. She said, after a long pause, "I forgave you a long time ago." Ndinda looked up. "Not for your sake," Mukima added quietly, "for mine, because I couldn't afford to carry that weight and build something at the same time, so I put it down. The Africans have a proverb: if we spend all our time looking for who killed us, we will never find who raised us." Mukima had chosen early to look for the second thing. The woman in the bread stall, Mama Tieno, who had given her a corner to sleep in. The factory veterans who had answered her questions. Mrs. Tetu, who had stopped at a roadside table and seen something worth betting on. Zulfa, who believed in the business enough to come to work in its earliest days.
These were the people who had raised her in the ways that mattered. Her father had failed her. Her stepmother had nearly destroyed her. But she had survived through others, through small acts of human kindness, scattered like stepping stones across a flood. And in choosing to forgive rather than to pursue, in choosing to build rather than to burn, she had not become smaller. She had become immense. Roger and Mukima did not return to the relationship they never truly had. You cannot rebuild what was never fully built. But they built something new, something slower and more careful. Sunday phone calls, a meal at the end of the month, Roger sitting in a quiet room, sometimes with a cup of tea, watching his daughter on old clips from that television appearance, studying her posture, her words, the way she laughed, and seeing in fragments the woman his late wife Wathira might have grown into. It was not the family any of them had wanted, but it was the family they had learned to tend. And Mukima's, the brand, the business, the name she had chosen to define herself with, continued to grow. Not just in revenue, not just in supermarket contracts and television mentions and growing orders for weddings and corporate events. It grew in what it meant. She began hiring young women who reminded her of her younger self, women from the streets, from difficult homes, from the margins of the city that never stops moving. She trained them. She gave them accommodation in the early months when they needed stability most. She paid them fairly and on time. She had not forgotten what a roof and a safe corner had meant to her when she was 19. She refused to forget. There's one more thing I want to tell you. Years later,
a journalist writing a profile on Nairobi women in food business, asked Mukima, "What kept you going when you were on the streets? When it was darkest, what kept you going?" Mukima thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "I think I kept asking myself one question. Not why is this happening to me, because that question has no good answer, and it will drive you mad if you ask it too long. I asked instead, what can I make from this?" She looked at the journalist, and when I started asking that question, everything that had broken me became the material I built with. And that, everybody, is the story of Mukima, the girl they called a witch, the woman who became a brand, the daughter who forgave, not to forget, but to be free. She was not saved by a miracle from above. She was not rescued by a stranger with a briefcase full of money. She was not vindicated by a sudden reversal of fortune that came from nowhere. She was saved by her own hands, by flour and fire, by stubbornness and grace, by the radical, defiant act of deciding that the story others told about her was not the one she would live. If you are watching this today and someone in your life has called you something you are not, if someone has reduced you to a word that was never true, I want you to remember Mukima. Remember what her hands made. No one can take that from you. No one. Before I go, I have one simple question for you. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? It doesn't matter if you are in Nairobi, Ottawa, New York, South Africa, Lagos, or anywhere else in this wide and wonderful world. Drop your city, drop your country. And if Mukima's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know or someone you are, share this video with them. Because sometimes people need to see their own story reflected back at them, just to remember that it doesn't end where they think it does. If you are new here, welcome to this channel. Please subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.